Welcome back to Beyond the Badge. The laughter was the first thing people heard. Not the doors opening, not the winter wind that followed a small boy inside, not the soft, careful footsteps of someone who had practiced being invisible in rooms that weren't built for him. The first thing that cut through the quiet hum of First Capital Heritage Bank on that cold Tuesday morning in November was the laughter of a grown man, loud, unhurried, and aimed directly at a child. Craig Hensley stood behind the marble counter in his pressed navy suit and laughed at a 10-year-old boy the way some people laugh at things they consider beneath them. Not with cruelty that hides itself, with cruelty that performs. The kind that needs an audience. The kind that looks around the room while it's happening to make sure everyone is watching. And they were watching. The woman near the sitting area in the fur coat, the man by the window on his phone, the two tellers behind the polished glass who exchanged a glance and then found something else to look at, the security guard near the door who shifted his weight and studied the floor with sudden, intense interest. They were all watching, and not one of them said a word. The boy standing at the counter had done nothing except walk through those glass doors with a brown envelope pressed carefully to his chest and speak in the quietest, most respectful voice a 10-year-old could manage. "Excuse me, sir. I'd like to check my account balance, please." That was all. And Craig Hensley had looked at his cracked shoes, had looked at his oversized jacket, had looked at his face, and had laughed. The boy's name was Marcus Elliot, and in that moment, standing at that marble counter with a lobby full of adults watching and saying nothing, he felt something move through him that was not quite shame, and not quite anger, but something that lived in the space between them, something that a 10-year-old should never have to feel. He pressed his feet flat against the floor inside his worn shoes and heard his grandmother's voice the way he always heard it when the world got hard, not as a memory, but as a presence, warm and steady and absolutely certain. "Hold your head up, Marcus. No matter what room you walk into, you hold your head up." He held it up. Craig reached across the counter and picked up the black platinum card from the envelope. He held it loosely, the way you hold something you've already decided doesn't belong where it was found. "Where did you get this?" he said, loud enough for the room. "It's mine, sir," Marcus said quietly. "My grandmother set up the account for me. All the documents are in the envelope." Craig did not look at the documents. He pointed toward a metal chair against the far wall, isolated, cold, positioned beside the janitor's closet as though it had been placed there for exactly this kind of purpose. "Sit over there. Don't move." And Marcus walked to the chair and sat down, because he was 10 years old and alone, and the room had already chosen its side. To understand what those 30 minutes cost Marcus Elliot, you have to understand where he came from. You have to understand the woman who raised him. Dorothy Elliot had been a school teacher for 40 years. She had taught third grade in the same underfunded school on the east side of the city for 4 decades, in a classroom where the ceiling tiles were stained and the textbooks were 10 years out of date, and the heat worked on most days, but not all of them. She had bought supplies with her own money every single year. She had stayed late without compensation. She had written recommendation letters and attended graduations and shown up to funerals for parents her former students had lost, because she understood that teaching a child means teaching the whole life around them, not just the part that sits in a desk from 8 to 3. She had never been wealthy. She had never tried to be. But she had saved. Every paycheck, from the very first one, she had set aside what she could. Not dramatically, not with grand announcements or carefully framed plans, just quietly, consistently, the way she did everything, with patience and purpose and the absolute faith that small things done with love accumulate into something that matters. She had lived in the same small house on Carver Street for 30 years. She had shopped at thrift stores, not because she had to, but because she had chosen to. She had driven a car with 200,000 miles on it, and she had cooked every meal from scratch. And she had worn the same good coat for 15 winters. and she had been, by every ordinary measure, a woman of modest means. But she had been building something the whole time, a foundation, a future, a door. Marcus had come to live with her when he was 4 years old, after his parents were no longer able to care for him. Dorothy had opened her small house and her large heart without hesitation and without complaint. And from that first day, she had looked at that 4-year-old boy the way she had looked at every child who ever sat in your classroom, as though he were already everything she believed he could become. Sunday mornings were their time. Marcus would wake to the smell before he was fully conscious, the warm, sweet smell of chocolate chip pancakes drifting down the hallway and under his bedroom door and pulling him gently out of sleep the way only the smell of something made with love can do. He would pad down the hall in his socks and stand in the kitchen doorway and watch her. Dorothy at the stove on Sunday mornings was one of the most peaceful things Marcus had ever seen in his life. She moved slowly, unhurried, the old blue sweater she wore every weekend slightly too big at the shoulders, her gray hair pinned neatly, her lips moving faintly with the words of a hymn she had been humming since before Marcus was born. The kitchen was small, and the window above the sink let in a pale rectangle of morning light that fell across the linoleum floor and touched the edges of everything with gold. She always knew the moment he appeared in the doorway without turning around. "Morning, baby," she would say. "Go wash your hands." He always did. They would sit across from each other at the small table, Marcus with his tall glass of orange juice, Dorothy with her coffee, and they would eat slowly and talk about everything and nothing. About what he was reading, about what she remembered from being young, about the neighbor's dog and the cardinal that kept coming to the bird feeder outside the kitchen window, and what Marcus wanted to be when he grew up, which changed from week to week, but always made Dorothy smile the same smile regardless of the answer. It was on one of those Sunday mornings, about a month before she passed, that she had knelt down in front of him in the kitchen and tied the laces of his shoes. Her hands were slower than they used to be. Her knees hurt when she bent them. But she had knelt anyway, carefully, and taken each frayed lace in her fingers and tied them with the same gentle precision she brought to everything. She looked up at him when she finished. Her eyes were so steady, so full. "These shoes may be cheap, baby," she said softly, "but your future is priceless. Don't you ever let anybody make you forget that." Marcus had nodded, the way children nod when they are absorbing something they don't yet have the full capacity to understand, but know instinctively they will need later. He understood it now. Sitting in a metal chair beside a janitor's closet in a marble bank lobby while people walked past him like he was furniture, he understood every word of it now, with a clarity that went all the way down to his bones. He reached into the envelope and took out her letter. The handwriting was uneven, her hands had trembled in those last weeks, but every word was deliberate. "My brave Marcus, by the time you read this, I will be gone. But I need you to know something before the world tries to tell you different. You are not defined by your shoes or your jacket or the neighborhood we live in. You are defined by what lives inside you. And what lives inside you is more than most people will ever have the courage to recognize. The money in that account is yours. Every dollar was earned with love and saved with purpose. It is not a gift, it is a promise. A promise that you will have every chance to become everything I always knew you were. Hold your head up, baby. Always. All my love forever, Grandma Dorothy." Marcus folded the letter with both hands and held it in his lap. He looked up at the lobby. A man in a camel coat walked through the doors and was greeted immediately by a smiling teller. A woman with a leather portfolio was escorted personally to a private office. A young couple laughed about something as they signed papers at a side desk. The lobby moved and breathed and functioned like the well-oiled, comfortable machine it was. For everyone it had been designed to serve. Marcus sat in his metal chair and watched all of it. 25 minutes, 30. Not one person looked at him with anything other than mild curiosity or deliberate avoidance. He looked down at his shoes one more time. The cracked soles, the laces Dorothy had tied for the last time a month ago in a kitchen that smelled of pancakes and morning light. He closed his eyes for just a moment. Then Craig Hensley called him back to the counter. His voice was theatrical, practiced, projected across the lobby with the confidence of a man who has never once been wrong in his own domain. "This young man has presented a card I believe does not belong to him. Security, please escort him out." The words moved through the lobby like a cold current. Marcus stood up. He tucked his grandmother's letter back into the brown envelope. He walked toward the glass doors without a word, without a scene, without giving Craig Hensley or anyone else in that lobby the satisfaction of seeing what it cost him. Outside, the November air was sharp and immediate. He sat down on the stone bench at the edge of the parking lot, and the cold moved through his jacket like it wasn't there. Cars passed. People walked by. A woman in a business coat glanced at him and looked quickly away. A man on his phone stepped around him without breaking stride. A delivery driver climbed back into his truck without looking up. The world kept moving. Marcus sat very still in the center of it, and for the first time since Dorothy had passed, he cried without trying to stop himself. Not loudly, just quietly and completely, the way grief comes when you have been holding it in a specific shape for too long and something finally breaks the edges of it. He was still sitting there when the black Mercedes rolled into the parking lot. He didn't look up when the door opened. He didn't look up when the footsteps crossed the asphalt toward him. He only looked up when they stopped, directly in front of him, and he found himself looking into the face of his uncle, Raymond. Raymond Elliot was tall and still in a silver-gray suit, and his eyes, when they found Marcus's face, went soft in the particular way of someone who loves a child and has just seen evidence of what the world is capable of doing to them. He knelt down, slowly, until they were level. "Hey, champ," he said. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then something in him let go, the careful composure he had carried all the way from the counter to the chair, to the door, to this bench, and he leaned into his uncle's shoulder and held on with both hands. Raymond held him, said nothing, because there are moments that words would only diminish. What Marcus did not know, what Craig Hensley certainly did not know, was that Raymond Elliot was the chief executive officer of Meridian Capital Holdings, and Meridian Capital Holdings owned 34% of the parent company of First Capital Heritage Bank. A family friend who had been in the lobby that morning recognized Marcus and called Raymond before the security guard reached the door. Raymond had changed direction without hesitation. When Marcus finally pulled back and told him everything, Raymond listened to it all. Every word, every detail, the laughter, the metal chair, the letter, the 30 minutes, the escort to the door. Then he stood up and held out his hand. "We're going back in," he said quietly. Marcus hesitated. "I don't want to," he whispered. Raymond looked at him with Dorothy's eyes. The same steadiness, the same certainty, the same absolute refusal to let the world have the final word. "We're not going back to fight," he said. "We're going back to show them they couldn't break us." Marcus took his hand. The automatic doors opened, and the lobby fell into a silence so sudden and so complete that the sound of their footsteps on the marble was the only thing moving in the room. The regional bank director who had accompanied Raymond from the parking lot stood quietly to the side. Craig Hensley looked up from behind the counter and passed through several expressions in rapid succession before his face settled into something that was no longer certain of itself. Raymond placed Marcus's documents on the counter in front of the nearest teller. "Please pull up this account," he said. The teller entered the account number, and then she went still. She looked at the screen, and then looked again, the way you look at something that requires confirmation before it can be believed. She turned the screen slowly. $487,263. $487,263. 40 years of chocolate chip pancake sundaes, 40 years of the same blue sweater and the same old car and the same thrift store shoes polished with the same quiet love. 40 years of a woman who had everything she needed and chose every single day to give it to a boy who needed it more. The lobby did not erupt. It went the other direction, into a silence deeper than the one before it. The silence of people confronting something they cannot undo. Raymond turned to Craig Hensley. His voice was low, measured, the kind of quiet that lands harder than shouting. You didn't know who he was, so you decided he was nobody. Craig said nothing. There was nothing adequate to say. Craig Hensley was suspended that afternoon and terminated by the end of the week. 15 years of career ended not by a lawsuit or outside pressure, but by a bank that reviewed the security footage, every minute of it, and chose accountability. The Dorothy Elliot Memorial Scholarship was established in the months that followed. Every year, it pays full college tuition for students from underserved communities who want to become teachers, because Dorothy had believed that education was the most powerful thing one person could offer another. And now, long after she was gone, her belief was still walking into classrooms. 8 years later, Marcus Elliot walked across the campus of Howard University on the first morning of his freshman year. The trees were gold in the autumn light, and the air carried the energy of people standing at the beginning of something that matters. He walked the way Dorothy had always walked, slowly, with intention, with his head held up. In his dorm room, on the shelf above his desk, sat a pair of old shoes, cracked soles, frayed laces, scuffed toes that had carried a 10-year-old boy across a cold parking lot on the hardest morning of his life. He had polished them himself before leaving, carefully, the way she had taught him. He had placed them where he would see them every single day, not as a reminder of what had been done to him, as a reminder of who had loved him enough to make sure it couldn't break him. Because that is where dignity comes from, not from marble lobbies or platinum cards or the approval of people who decide who you are before you finished your first sentence. It comes from small kitchens and Sunday mornings and the hands of someone who knelt down on aching knees to tie a little boy's shoes and looked up at him and said with total and absolute certainty that his future was priceless. Dorothy Elliot had said that to Marcus, and he had carried it all the way here. If you have ever had someone love you like that, quietly, completely, without asking for anything in return, you already know that no laughter in any marble lobby can touch what they gave you. And if you have lost someone like that, you know that they don't leave. They stay in the way you hold your head when the room is against you. They stay in the way you fold a letter carefully when your hands want to shake. They stay in every room you walk into with your chin up and your heart steady, and everything they ever told you about your worth held close where no one can take it. Hold your head up, no matter what room you walk into. Always. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who gave everything quietly so that you could stand where you are standing today, leave their name in the comments. This community was built for stories like theirs. If you are new to Beyond the Badge, welcome. Every story here is a reminder that character outlasts cruelty, that love outlasts loss, and that dignity, when carried with patience and courage, always finds its way to the light. Subscribe to Beyond the Badge so you never miss a story that matters. Share this today with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. You never know whose cold bench they might be sitting on right now. Beyond the Badge, because every life carries a story worth telling.